I used to believe that love was enough to overcome anything. That's what movies taught me. What my mother whispered when tucking me in at night. What greeting cards promised in gold-embossed letters. No one warned me that love could be a beautiful lie. A currency that loses its value the moment you need it most. The realization didn't come as a thunderbolt. It was a slow unraveling, like a favorite sweater catching on a nail and gradually coming undone, thread by thread. But if I had to pinpoint when the first significant thread snapped, it would be our 5th anniversary. I'd spent weeks planning the perfect evening. James and I had been drifting apart, him buried in his new promotion, me struggling to find my footing after being laid off from the publishing house. This anniversary felt like our chance to reconnect, to remember why we'd chosen each other in the first place. I reserved a table at Calloway's, the restaurant where he'd proposed. I wore the emerald dress he once said made my eyes look like spring. I even arranged for his favorite dessert, a chocolate soufflé that needed to be ordered an hour in advance. Every detail considered, every moment choreographed for intimacy. At 6:30, I arrived early to make sure everything was perfect. The maitre d' smiled knowingly as he led me to our table by the window, overlooking the Boston Harbor lights. "Your husband is a lucky man," he said, pulling out my chair. I smiled, feeling the pleasant flutter of anticipation. By 7:15, my glass of wine was half empty, and the waiter had already asked twice if I wanted to order. "He's just running late," I assured him, checking my phone again. No messages, no missed calls. I sent another text. "Table's ready. Food looks amazing. Hurry." I added a heart emoji, though my own heart was starting to sink. At 7:40, I called him. It went straight to voicemail. I left a message, keeping my voice light. "Hey, just wondering where you are. The soufflé can't wait forever, and neither can I." I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. By 8:30, the pitying looks from the waitstaff became unbearable. The candle at our table had burned halfway down. I ordered the soufflé anyway, a small rebellion against the growing knot in my stomach. When it arrived, perfect and golden, I took a picture and sent it to him. "Guess you're missing out," I typed, trying to sound playful rather than wounded. I ate alone, mechanically cutting the dessert into tiny pieces, each bite tasting like disappointment. Around me, couples leaned into each other's words, their laughter genuine, their connections visible. I paid the bill, including the untouched salmon that would have been his dinner, and walked out with my head high, though everything inside me felt impossibly low. It was nearly 10 p.m. when I got home. The apartment was dark, empty. I kicked off my heels, letting them clatter against the hardwood floor. I didn't bother picking them up. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection. Hair still perfectly styled, makeup still flawless, eyes bright with unshed tears. I'd made such an effort to be beautiful for a man who couldn't be bothered to show up. At 11:42, I heard his key in the lock. I was sitting in the dark living room, still in my dress, a glass of whiskey in my hand. He didn't notice me at first, quietly shutting the door behind him and slipping off his shoes. "How was your late meeting?" I asked, my voice cutting through the darkness. He startled, hand flying to his chest. "Jesus, Claire, you scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark?" I didn't answer. I just took another sip of whiskey, letting the silence stretch between us. His tie was loosened, his collar unbuttoned. He smelled of expensive scotch and someone else's perfume, something floral and youthful. "Claire?" He tried again, flipping on the light. His eyes widened slightly when he saw my dress. "What's going on?" "It's September 16th, I said simply. I watched realization dawn on his face, followed immediately by practiced contrition. "Our anniversary," he whispered. "God, Claire, I'm so sorry. The Peterson account, the deadline moved up, and then Ryan insisted we celebrate landing the deal." His excuses spilled out, practiced and hollow. I set my glass down carefully. I waited for 2 hours at Calloway's. His face crumpled into the perfect mask of remorse. He'd always been good at that. The furrowed brow, the downturned mouth, the eyes that seemed to shimmer with self-reproach. "I'll make it up to you. I promise. We'll go tomorrow night, anywhere you want." But as I looked at him, this handsome stranger I'd married, I realized something with startling clarity. He wasn't sorry he'd missed our anniversary. He was sorry he'd been caught. After that night, James became the perfect husband. For exactly 3 weeks, he brought home flowers without occasion. He called during lunch breaks just to hear my voice. He suggested weekend trips to Vermont to see the fall foliage. I wanted to believe this was the real James returning to me, that the distant, distracted man had been a temporary phase. I almost convinced myself it was true. Then came the late nights again. The missed calls, the vague explanations about client meetings and work emergencies. Each excuse was plausible on its own, but strung together, they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. It was Emma who finally said what I couldn't bring myself to acknowledge. We were having coffee at the little bakery near the public garden, autumn leaves swirling around our feet on the patio. "You know he's cheating, right?" she said, stirring her latte with brutal casualness. I nearly choked on my scone. "You don't know that." Emma sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Claire, honey, you're a writer. You notice details. You see patterns. Stop pretending you don't see this one." I pulled my hand away, suddenly angry. Not at Emma, she was just the messenger, but at myself for needing someone else to say it out loud. Even if I suspected something, which I'm not saying I do, I'd need proof. I can't just accuse him. Emma shrugged. "So, get proof." The idea followed me home like a stray cat, persistent and impossible to ignore. That evening, when James called to say he'd be working late again, I heard a woman's laugh in the background before he quickly muted the call. That laugh, bright, uninhibited, didn't belong in a corporate boardroom at 8 p.m. I spent the next day pretending everything was normal while a plan formed in my mind. When James left for work, I went through his things methodically. His desk drawers revealed nothing. His email was password protected. His pockets contained only the usual: wallet, keys, breath mints. Then I checked our cellular bill online. Pages of calls and texts to a number I didn't recognize. Dozens of them, mostly late at night or during his supposed lunch breaks. My fingers shook as I copied the number into my phone. I didn't call it, not yet, but having it felt like holding a loaded gun. That Friday, James announced he had to attend a conference in New York, just for the weekend. He'd be back Sunday night. He kissed me goodbye at the door, his overnight bag slung over his shoulder, promises of calls and texts trailing behind him like breadcrumbs. I waited exactly 1 hour before I called Maggie, my college roommate who now worked as a travel agent. "Can you check something for me?" I asked after small talk. "I need to know if there's a reservation under James Mitchell at any New York hotels this weekend." The silence on the line told me she understood what I was really asking. "Give me a few minutes," she said softly. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "No James Mitchell in any major NYC hotels this weekend. I'm sorry, Claire." I sat on this information for about an hour, turning it over in my mind like a strange artifact. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I turned on the location sharing feature on our family phone plan and watched as the little blue dot that was my husband moved steadily across the city map. Not south toward New York, but west toward the suburbs. The dot finally stopped moving in Brookline, at an address I didn't recognize. I plugged it into Google Maps and saw it was an upscale apartment complex called the Westbury. I don't know what possessed me to drive there. Some need for certainty, perhaps. Or maybe just the masochistic desire to see my worst fears confirmed. I parked across the street, feeling like a character in one of my own suspense novels, watching the entrance through my windshield. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:20, James walked out the front doors with a woman I'd never seen before. She was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with a cascade of honey blonde hair and a confident stride. James had his hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward his car with the easy intimacy of longtime lovers. My phone was in my hand before I realized what I was doing. I zoomed in and took several photos of them together. In one, he was opening the car door for her, a courtesy he'd long stopped extending to me. In another, they were laughing about something, their faces close enough to share breath. The final photo caught them kissing beside the car, his hands tangled in that perfect blonde hair, her body arched toward his like a flower-seeking sun. I sat there long after they drove away, the photos burning a hole in my phone and my heart. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt a strange sense of calm washing over me. Like the stillness after a long-anticipated storm finally breaks. The truth was no longer a suspicion I could bury, or a fear I could rationalize away. It was pixels on a screen, documented and undeniable. My husband was living a double life, and I had been cast as the fool who waited at home, accepting thin excuses and manufactured affection. As I drove home through the gathering darkness, I realized that knowledge wasn't just power, it was freedom. For months, maybe years, I'd been trapped in the prison of uncertainty, second-guessing my instincts, blaming myself for the distance between us. Now I knew, and knowing changed everything. Sunday evening arrived with the muted glow of autumn sunset and the practiced lies of my husband's return. I watched from the kitchen as he dropped his overnight bag by the door, his movements weary but satisfied, like a man who'd accomplished exactly what he set out to do. "The conference was exhausting," he announced, loosening his tie. "Back-to-back panels all weekend." I nodded, stirring the pasta sauce I'd been preparing. "Learn anything interesting?" He launched into a detailed account of fictional presentations and imaginary networking opportunities, building an elaborate architecture of deceit while I chopped basil and checked the garlic bread. His performance was flawless, the right amount of technical jargon, the perfect touch of conference complaint, even a self-deprecating story about spilling coffee on a potential client. I wondered how many times I'd swallowed these stories whole, nodding sympathetically while he constructed his parallel life piece by piece. "You're quiet tonight," he finally noticed, coming up behind me to kiss my neck. His cologne mingled with another scent, something floral that didn't belong to me. "Just tired," I replied, moving away under the pretense of draining the pasta. "How was the hotel?" "Fine. Standard corporate place. Nothing special." I hummed noncommittally. The Westbury must have upped their game then. His hands froze in the act of reaching for wine glasses. The silence expanded between us, heavy with unspoken accusations. When he finally turned to face me, his expression was carefully neutral. "What are you talking about?" I finished plating our dinner before answering. "Let's eat while it's hot." The meal unfolded in excruciating normalcy. We discussed an upcoming election, a book I'd been reading, the neighbor's new landscaping project. All while the photographs on my phone burned like a brand against my thigh. All while his fictional New York weekend hung in the air between us, daring me to reach out and tear it apart. I didn't. Not yet. After dinner, he volunteered to do the dishes, an unusual offer that would have once delighted me but now registered as guilt in action. I left him to it, retreating to our home office where I quietly gathered what I needed: financial statements, property documents, insurance policies. I scanned the most important ones, emailing copies to myself and to Emma for safekeeping. When he found me there, I was sitting calmly at the desk, apparently engrossed in paying bills online. "What are you doing?" he asked, casual but watchful. "Just catching up on some financial housekeeping," I replied truthfully. "Did you know our anniversary is mentioned in our life insurance policy? 5 years married means the benefits change." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "No, I didn't realize that. It's amazing what details matter in the long run," I said, closing the laptop. Things we never think about until we need them. That night in bed, he reached for me in the darkness, his hands seeking familiar terrain. I didn't push him away. I didn't welcome him either. I simply existed beneath his touch, responding with mechanical precision while my mind cataloged every lie he'd told, every moment he'd stolen from our marriage to give to her. Afterward, he fell asleep quickly, one arm draped possessively across my waist. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his even breathing, wondering if he dreamed of her on these nights, wondering if he whispered my name when he was with her, or if he ever confused us in the tangle of his double life. In the morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the library. As soon as James left for work, I drove to see Patricia Winters, a divorce attorney Emma had recommended. Patricia's office was minimalist and efficient, much like the woman herself. No false sympathy, no hand-wringing, just clear questions and clearer advice. "Massachusetts is a no-fault state," she explained, "but evidence of infidelity can affect property division and alimony considerations." I slid my phone across her desk, the damning photographs displayed on the screen. "Is this enough evidence?" She examined them, her expression unchanging. "It's a start. We'll need more. Financial records showing unexplained expenses, testimony about his absences, proof of lies told to cover his activities. I can get those things, I said with quiet certainty. Patricia looked at me then, really looked at me, as if recalculating something. Most clients come in here emotional, angry, devastated, sometimes both. You seem resolved, I supplied. I've done my grieving in installments, Patricia. A little bit every time he came home late smelling like someone else. A little bit every time he checked his phone and smiled at messages that weren't from me. There's nothing left to grieve now but wasted time. She nodded, respect flickering in her eyes. We'll need to move carefully. If he suspects you're preparing to leave, he might hide assets or create obstacles. He won't suspect, I assured her. He thinks I'm exactly where he wants me. Home, trusting, convenient. I left her office with a detailed plan and a strange sense of lightness. For weeks I'd been carrying the weight of suspicion, the burden of second-guessing my own perceptions. Now, paradoxically, the confirmation of my worst fears had set me free. That evening I greeted James with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. We ate takeout Chinese food while watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures, strange, silent beings that survive in darkness, adapting to impossible pressures. I found myself oddly relating to them. I was thinking, he said casually during a commercial break, maybe we could take that trip to Vermont this weekend. The foliage should be perfect now. I watched him carefully construct this gesture of devotion, this performance of the attentive husband. I wondered if the blonde from the Westbury knew about these performances. I wondered if she believed herself to be the only audience, just as I once had. That sounds perfect, I lied, matching his performance with my own. I've been wanting to get away. He smiled, pleased with himself for fixing what he didn't know was irreparably broken. He reached for my hand, and I let him take it, feeling nothing but the quiet countdown beginning in my mind. 3 more weeks. 3 more weeks of evidence gathering, of careful planning, of pretending to be the woman he thought I still was. 3 more weeks until the silent reckoning would finally find its voice. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a strange choreography of deception. While James lived his double life, I crafted my own performance. The unsuspecting wife, going through the motions of our marriage while systematically dismantling its foundations. I became a meticulous archaeologist of betrayal, excavating evidence layer by careful layer. I found receipts for jewelry I'd never received, dinner reservations at restaurants I'd never visited, hotel charges in our own city on nights he'd claimed to be working late. Each discovery should have hurt, but instead, it hardened my resolve like clay in a kiln. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, when James had his regular client meetings, I visited banks and opened accounts in my name only. I transferred portions of our joint savings, nothing suspicious, just enough to establish a financial foothold outside his reach. I signed a lease on a small apartment across town, paying 3 months in advance. I forwarded my personal mail to a P.O. box. I quietly returned to freelance writing, securing assignments that would sustain me in the coming months. Emma called these preparations my exit strategy. I preferred to think of them as my re-entry plan, not an escape from marriage, but a return to myself. You're handling this with scary efficiency, she remarked one afternoon as she helped me secretly move boxes of personal items to my new apartment. I'd be a sobbing wreck. I paused, considering this as I wrapped my grandmother's china in bubble wrap. Maybe I already was that wreck, Emma. Maybe I cried myself out over the past year without even knowing why. Now I'm just done. The truth was, I did still cry sometimes, alone in my car or in the shower where the sound wouldn't betray me. Not for James, or even for our marriage, but for the woman I had been, trusting, devoted, willfully blind to the fractures spreading beneath her feet. I mourned her in private moments, then returned to my careful orchestrations. Patricia, my attorney, approved of my methodical approach. Most clients self-sabotage by confronting their spouse too early, she told me during our weekly check-ins. Your restraint is impressive, but restraint was becoming harder to maintain. Each night beside James in bed felt like lying next to a stranger who wore my husband's face. Each kiss goodbye in the morning tasted like ash. When he touched me, I had to close my eyes and disappear into some faraway corner of myself. The performance was draining me, thinning my edges until I sometimes caught myself wondering which version of me was real anymore. Then came the phone call that collapsed the timeline. I was sorting through old financial statements when my cell phone rang. An unknown local number. Something made me answer instead of letting it go to voicemail. Is this Claire Mitchell? A woman's voice. Unfamiliar and slightly hesitant. Yes. Who's this? A pause, then. My name is Rachel Winters. I think you might be married to my boyfriend, James. The world tilted sideways for a moment, then righted itself with startling clarity. Not the blonde from the Westbury, but someone else entirely. A third life. A third woman. I'm listening, I said, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest. Her story spilled out in rushed, nervous fragments. She'd met James at a conference, a real one, apparently, 18 months ago. He'd told her he was divorced, that his ex-wife, me, had moved to Seattle. They'd been dating seriously, meeting whenever his consulting work brought him to Boston. He'd given her a key to his apartment in Brookline. She'd introduced him to her parents. I found your wedding photo, she explained, hidden in the back of his desk drawer at the apartment. You were both standing in front of the public garden. The date on the back said it was only 6 years ago. I closed my eyes, remembering that sunny June day, the swan boats drifting behind us as we smiled for the camera. Thank you for calling me, Rachel. Her voice caught. I thought you should know. I'd want someone to tell me. After we hung up, I sat motionless at the kitchen table, the afternoon light stretching across the polished wood. Not one woman, but two. Not a single affair, but a carefully constructed constellation of lies, connecting all of us to the same deceitful star. Something crystallized in me then. A cold, clear certainty. I couldn't wait 3 more weeks. I couldn't spend another night performing for a man who had turned our life into fiction. The time for silence and strategy had passed. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning, ready or not. I made 3 phone calls. First to Patricia, revising our timeline. Then to Emma, asking her to meet me at my new apartment the following afternoon. And finally to a locksmith, scheduling an early morning appointment to change the locks on our home. That night, I cooked James's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted potatoes. I opened an expensive bottle of wine. I wore the blue dress he'd always loved. I listened to his stories and laughed at his jokes and touched his hand across the table. It was a beautiful Last Supper, perfect in every detail. He didn't suspect a thing. Morning arrived with a pale October light filtering through our bedroom curtains. I'd been awake for hours, watching the shadows retreat across the ceiling, listening to James's steady breathing beside me. For the last time, I studied his sleeping profile. The straight nose, the slight furrow between his brows, the mouth that had whispered love to me and lies to others with equal conviction. I slipped out of bed at 6:15, 15 minutes before his alarm would sound. I showered and dressed quietly, choosing clothes with careful deliberation. A charcoal gray suit I'd worn to job interviews, a silk blouse the color of steel, armor, not sentiment. By the time James's alarm chirped, I was in the kitchen brewing coffee, my suitcase already loaded in my car. I heard his routine unfold upstairs, the shower running, the electric razor buzzing, drawers opening and closing, the soundtrack of ordinary mornings that would never be ordinary again. He appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7:30, knotting his tie, burgundy silk against crisp white cotton. "You're up early," he remarked, accepting the coffee mug I offered. "Big day at the library?" "No," I said simply. "I took the day off. We need to talk." His eyes flickered briefly, a momentary calculation, before settling into concerned attention. "Everything okay? Please sit down, James." He did, watching me warily over the rim of his coffee mug. I remained standing, needing the slight advantage of height. "I know about the Westbury," I said, my voice calm and even. "I know about Rachel. I know there's no consulting job, no late meetings, no conferences in New York." His face didn't crumple in shame or flash with anger. Instead, it smoothed into something carefully blank, a canvas wiped clean of expression. Only his fingers, tightening around the mug, betrayed any reaction. "Claire," he began, but I raised my hand, stopping him. "I don't want explanations or apologies. They're meaningless now." I placed a manila envelope on the table between us. "These are divorce papers," Patricia Winters will handle the legal details. I've already moved out. He stared at the envelope, as if it might suddenly transform into something else, something less final. When he looked up, calculation had replaced blankness. This is pretty dramatic, don't you think? We could at least try counseling. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Counseling is for couples who want to save their marriage. You've been building exit ramps from ours for years. That's not fair, he protested, his voice taking on the wounded tone I'd once found so compelling. I've made mistakes, yes, but Rachel isn't a mistake, James. Neither is the woman from the Westbury. They're choices you made repeatedly, deliberately, while lying to my face. I leaned forward, both hands braced against the table. How many others are there? Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of genuine surprise that I knew this much, that I'd connected these particular dots. He recovered quickly, switching tactics. I've been unhappy, he said softly. You've been distant, absorbed in your writing. I felt neglected. There it was, the subtle redirection of blame I should have expected. Classic James, reshaping reality to cast himself as the victim of circumstances rather than their architect. Once I might have accepted this narrative, might have shouldered the guilt he was attempting to transfer. Not anymore. My writing dried up years ago, I reminded him quietly. Around the time your late nights started, around the time your attention began to wander. Don't rewrite history to ease your conscience. He pushed back from the table abruptly, coffee sloshing over the rim of his mug. You're being irrational. We can work through this. There is no we anymore, I said. The locks have already been changed. You'll need to contact Patricia about arranging to collect your things. His face darkened. You changed the locks? That's my house too. Actually, it's not. I withdrew another document from my bag and placed it beside the divorce papers. The deed is in my name. My inheritance paid the down payment. Your name isn't on any of the property documents. Check if you don't believe me. This was the one advantage I'd held from the beginning. The house had been purchased primarily with money my grandparents had left me. We'd intended to add James to the deed after the first year, but somehow it had never happened, always pushed aside by more pressing concerns. The realization spread across his face like a stain. His charming facade cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. You calculated bitch, he hissed. You've been planning this. Yes, I acknowledged without flinching. Just like you planned your evenings with Rachel while telling me you were working. Just like you planned weekends with your Westbury woman while I waited at home. He stood suddenly, looming over me. You'll regret this. I'll fight you for everything. I didn't back away. There's nothing to fight for, James. I've documented every affair, every lie, every missing dollar. I have photographs, bank statements, hotel receipts, and now I have Rachel. Fight if you want, but you'll only expose yourself further. The threat drained from his posture, replaced by something closer to panic. James had always prized his reputation, his carefully cultivated image of success and integrity. The prospect of public exposure was the one thing I knew would terrify him more than financial loss. I'm leaving now, I said, picking up my bag. Patricia's contact information is in the envelope. The divorce terms are fair, much fairer than you deserve. I suggest you sign them. At the doorway, I paused, turning back to face the man I'd once built my life around. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the morning light and the weight of exposed deception. Why? He asked, and for the first time, his voice held a note of genuine bewilderment. Why now, after all this time? I considered this, searching for the precise truth. Because I finally realized that loving you was costing me my self-respect, and that's a price no one should have to pay. The door closed behind me with a soft, definitive click. In my car, I took one deep breath, then another, my hands steady on the steering wheel. I didn't look back at the house as I drove away. There was nothing there for me now but echoes. The first night in my new apartment was strangely peaceful. The space was small, just a bedroom, bathroom, and combined kitchen living area, but it was mine alone. No lingering cologne on the towels, no phantom presence I was constantly orienting myself around. I slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. Emma brought Thai food and wine the next evening, settling cross-legged on my still unwrapped futon. "So," she said, filling our glasses, "how does it feel to be a woman of decisive action?" I considered this as I twirled noodles around my fork. Exhausting. Terrifying. I paused, searching for the right word. Necessary. The fallout began quickly. James called 17 times that first day, his messages evolving from wounded bewilderment to negotiation to barely contained rage. I didn't answer. Patricia had been clear. No direct communication until the legal process was underway. By day 3, his tactics shifted. Mutual friends called with concerns. James was worried about my mental health. James thought I might be having a breakdown. James just wanted to make sure I was okay. I recognized the strategy. He was reframing our separation as my instability rather than his infidelity. "He's trying to control the narrative," Patricia confirmed during our check-in call. "Standard procedure for men like him. Don't engage." I didn't. Instead, I focused on reconstructing my life, piece by quiet piece. I established a routine in my new space. Morning coffee by the window that overlooked a small park. Afternoons at the library where I still worked part-time. Evenings dedicated to writing again. Words came slowly at first, then in a rush, as if they'd been dammed behind my silence for years. 2 weeks after I left, Rachel called again. "He's been trying to contact me," she said without preamble. "Telling me you're unstable, that you invented stories about affairs because you're obsessed with him." I sighed, unsurprised. "What do you think?" "I think he's exactly who I suspected he was," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm testifying for your divorce case if you need me. I saved our text messages, emails, everything. We met for coffee the following week, 2 women connected by the same betrayal. She was younger than me, yes, but not the vapid girl I'd imagined. She was completing her PhD in environmental science, her conversation sharp and thoughtful. In another life, we might have been friends. "I never knew about you," she said, stirring her latte. "Not really. He had this whole story about his ex-wife in Seattle. I feel so stupid." "Don't," I said firmly. "He constructed elaborate lies because they worked. That's on him, not us." As we parted, she hesitated, then hugged me quickly. "I'm sorry for what happened, but I'm glad we met." I watched her walk away, her blonde hair catching the autumn sunlight, and felt an unexpected lightness. The women in James's life weren't enemies or competitors. We were unwitting players in his deception, now freed from our assigned roles. A month into my new life, the divorce proceedings were moving forward. James had finally accepted the inevitable, signing the papers with minimal contest after Patricia presented the full extent of our evidence. The house would be sold, the proceeds divided according to original investment. My inheritance remained protected. His retirement accounts remained his, a clean severing. It was around this time that my first piece was published, a personal essay about rebuilding after betrayal, though I changed enough details to make it unrecognizable to anyone who knew us. The editor asked for more, suggesting a regular column. Words that had abandoned me for years now flowed freely, as if the act of reclaiming my life had also reclaimed my voice. On a crisp November morning, I returned to our old house to collect the last of my belongings. James had moved out weeks earlier, leaving the space half empty, echoing with absence. I walked through rooms that had once held our shared life, touching door frames and window ledges like a farewell. In the bedroom closet, behind a stack of winter sweaters, I found a small blue box I'd forgotten, filled with anniversary cards, concert tickets, little mementos from our early years together. I sat on the bare mattress and sifted through them, expecting pain. Instead, I felt a gentle recognition, like looking at photographs of a distant relative. These memories belonged to me, but they no longer defined me. I left the box on the mattress when I departed. Those fragments of the past were part of the house now, artifacts for the next owners to discover or discard. That evening, I met Emma for dinner at a new restaurant across town, somewhere James and I had never been. Over plates of risotto and glasses of Pinot Noir, we talked about everything except my divorce, her promotion, my writing, a film we both wanted to see. "You seem different," she observed as we waited for dessert. "Lighter, somehow." I smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. I am different. For years I was trying to save something that wasn't worth saving. Now I'm just living. Later, walking home alone through quiet streets, I passed a couple arguing on a corner, the woman crying, the man defensive, both locked in a familiar pattern of hurt and accusation. I wanted to tell them what I now knew, that love shouldn't require constant sacrifice, that partnership shouldn't diminish you, that sometimes the bravest choice is to walk away. Instead, I continued past them, my breath clouding in the November air. Their story wasn't mine to interrupt. Mine was still unfolding, one quiet step at a time. In my apartment, I kicked off my shoes and opened my laptop. The cursor blinked expectantly at the top of a blank page. I began to type, words flowing easily now. The first night in my new apartment was strangely peaceful. Outside my window, the city lights glimmered against the darkening sky. I was no longer waiting for someone to come home, no longer bracing for the next disappointment. I was exactly where I needed to be, in a space entirely my own, writing my way forward, one truth at a time.